Camille Hayes was born into a world that seemed determined to hold her down before she even had a chance to stand. Her earliest memories were etched against the backdrop of narrow, dimly lit streets where the cold concrete bore silent witness to generations of struggle. In the heart of a poor neighborhood, where dreams often withered like fragile seedlings under the weight of systemic neglect, Camille learned early that justice was not a birthright, it was a battle. The neighborhood itself was a paradox of resilience and decay. Cracked sidewalks and faded murals stood side by side with sparks of defiant hope. Each day, the hum of sirens punctuated the near-permanent twilight of the urban sprawl, and the weary eyes of neighbors spoke tales of both sorrow and quiet determination. For Camille, these surroundings became a classroom of life. She absorbed every lesson with a mixture of awe and sorrow, witnessing firsthand the profound impact of systemic racial injustice. Violence and discriminatory practices weren't distant stories in the news, they were lived realities that imbued her soul with a sense of urgency. Her family, though struggling with poverty, exuded a spirit of endurance. Her parents, whose own experiences with prejudice were cloaked in quiet dignity, instilled in her the belief that every hardship held a lesson and every setback a chance for growth. They taught her that while the world might often seem unforgiving, the measure of a person's worth was determined by their capacity to rise against it. It was in this crucible of struggle and hope that Camille's inner fire was kindled. From a tender age, Camille witnessed the cruelty meted out not only by external forces but also by the institutions meant to serve and protect. The police, who were supposed to uphold justice, were often agents of the very injustice they were meant to combat. To a young girl with a keen sense of right and wrong, these contradictions were deeply confusing. How could the same figures tasked with safeguarding lives be complicit in creating fear and pain? This dissonance fed a growing resolve inside her, one that would define her life's path. As she grew older, the raw exposure to inequity sharpened Camille's senses. Every incident of brutality, every whispered story of abuse, and every sigh laden with despair from her elders etched themselves onto her heart. Rather than causing her to retreat in silence, these experiences became the catalyst for her determination to forge a new narrative. She resolved to confront these injustices head-on, to dismantle the cycles of oppression that had defined the lives of so many before her. In that decision, there was a profound, personal rebellion, a refusal to be molded by circumstances beyond her control. High school was a transformative period for Camille. While many of her peers were distracted by the trivialities of adolescence, she was consumed by a burning desire for change. She excelled academically, not just because of her natural intellect, but because she viewed education as a tool of empowerment, a weapon to combat the systemic inequities plaguing her community. Late nights were spent studying in small, cramped rooms lit by the flickering light of a single, overburdened bulb. The textbooks, often shared among several students, became a sanctuary of ideas and possibilities. In the margins of every page, she scribbled dreams of reform, equality, and a future where justice wasn't a privilege reserved for the few. Yet, every step forward was met with obstacles. The biases of society, so deeply entrenched, were reflected in the subtle dismissals and outright derisions of those in authority. Teachers sometimes underestimated her potential, while local officials were quick to write off her aspirations as mere youthful fancy. But these dismissals only galvanized her further. Camille saw in each slight and each discouraging remark a reminder of what was at stake, and a personal mandate to overturn a system that thrived on devaluing individuals like her. The decision to join the police force was one of the most controversial, and courageous, in Camille's life. It was a path laden with contradictions. On one hand, it offered her a platform to challenge the very machine that had wronged her community, on the other, it required her to infiltrate and eventually lead within an organization steeped in the very culture of discrimination she despised. Many in her community questioned her motives, afraid that her position might compromise her ability to stand in solidarity with those who had suffered so long. But Camille was unwavering. She believed that to truly create change, one had to work from within the system, to understand its workings intimately, and then reform it from the inside out. The initial days at the police academy were grueling, filled with rigorous physical training, long hours, and a curriculum that, too often, glossed over the deeper issues of institutional bias. Yet Camille persisted. Her determination was matched by a fierce intellect and a natural sense of justice that set her apart from her peers. Despite the machismo and the underlying currents of prejudice within the academy, she emerged as a dedicated officer, known for her integrity, tactical acumen, and an uncanny ability to empathize with even the most disenfranchised members of society. As she progressed through her career, Camille encountered the dark underbelly of the institution. The early euphoria of joining the force quickly gave way to the reality of internal politics, where the chains of prejudice and legacy ran deep. Senior officers, often resistant to any notion of reform, viewed her ascent not as a victory for justice but as a threat to the status quo. It was in these moments of bitter confrontation that Camille's resolve was truly tested. Each instance of overt disrespect and every covert attempt to undermine her authority became both a wound and a lesson, a reminder of the uphill battle she faced. The struggle was not merely external. Camille's inner world was a tumult of conflicting emotions. She felt the weight of representing a community that had long been neglected, and the constant tension between her personal identity and her professional role was unrelenting. In quiet moments, away from the hardened exterior demanded by her role, she grappled with feelings of isolation and the pain of being misunderstood by those closest to her. The very qualities that made her a beacon of hope, her passion, her empathy, her relentless pursuit of justice, were often twisted into accusations of being overly emotional or unprofessional by those entrenched in old-school ways of policing. But it was this very vulnerability, this emotional rawness, that fueled Camille's determination. Instead of burying her feelings, she learned to harness them, channeling her grief and anger into a force that sought systematic change. In her quiet moments of reflection, often spent in the desolate quiet of an empty precinct late at night, she penned thoughtful entries in her journal. She wrote about the haunting images of her childhood, the crying mother in a crumbling doorway, the tear-stained faces of those who had been failed by the system, the silent screams of souls lost in a world that had no room for them. These writings, raw and unfiltered, served as both catharsis and a reminder of her unyielding commitment to be different. Camille's journey in those early years was marked not only by external challenges but by an internal renaissance. With every obstacle, every act of systemic injustice, she discovered new reservoirs of strength. The adversity she experienced was like the rough carving of a precious sculpture, chipping away the excess to reveal the resilient masterpiece beneath. The hardships weren't seen as punishments, but as harsh mentors that taught her the value of perseverance, integrity, and unwavering resolve. Each setback was met with a steely determination to push harder. When colleagues doubted her ability to lead because of her background, Camille doubled down on her commitment to excellence. When discriminatory practices undermined her efforts, she responded not with bitterness but with a measured demand for accountability and reform. In her eyes burned the fierce belief that one day, the world would see her for what she truly was, a leader born out of adversity, tempered by injustice, yet unbreakable in spirit. By the time she had firmly established herself as an officer, Camille had already become a symbol of hope for those who had long been silenced by systemic failures. Her story resonated deeply, echoing in the hearts of individuals who recognized in her the same spark of relentless determination to transcend the limitations forced upon them by society. It was clear that Camille Hayes was more than just another officer in a deeply flawed system. She was a force to be reckoned with, a living testament to the idea that even in the darkest corners, light could be kindled. As Camille walked the long, familiar roads of her youth, a journey laden with bittersweet memories of despair and redemption, she carried with her an unspoken promise, that no matter the obstacles, she would fight not only for her own dignity but for the dignity of every soul marginalized by injustice. Her life was a constant reminder that true strength lay not in the absence of vulnerability, but in the courage to transform pain into purposeful action. In this early chapter of her life, Camille Hayes' path was already drawn in bold, indelible strokes. The scars of her past were not marks of defeat but emblems of survival, a narrative that would, in time, ripple outward to challenge the very foundations of a system bent on perpetuating inequality. And while the echoes of those tumultuous early years still reverberated in her heart, they also fueled a transformative journey, one that promised a future where justice and empathy could finally prevail. What do you think was the most defining moment in Camille's early life that shaped her relentless pursuit of justice? At the break of dawn, the city awoke to a peculiar stillness, an eerie calm that was quickly pierced by an underlying tension. The morning sky was a swirling blend of muted grays and soft blues, while a dense fog crept along the quiet streets, muting the sounds of urban life. It was as if nature itself had conspired to cloak the unfolding events in mystery and foreboding. Today, for reasons known to only a select few at the top of the police hierarchy, a covert test was scheduled, a test that would push each member of the unit to confront not only their training but also the deep-seated instincts and biases that lurked beneath the surface. In a nondescript van parked a few blocks away from the main precinct, senior leaders had meticulously planned every detail. The exercise was designed as a surprise simulation to gauge the reaction of officers when confronted with a seemingly real-life situation, an encounter with a vulnerable civilian on the street. Unbeknownst to the majority of the officers, the civilian was, in fact, a planted participant, a living test subject whose presence was intended to simulate a scenario of escalating conflict. The air in the van was thick with anticipation, and hidden from the eyes of the officers was Camille Hayes, the formidable leader whose secret participation in this exercise was meant to expose the cracks within the force. It was a dangerous gambit, one that balanced on the thin line between controlled simulation and actual breakdown of discipline. The scene was set on a foggy street where the lamplight seemed to tremble in the cool morning air. A lone figure, dressed in modest, unassuming attire, stood by the curb. With her shoulders slightly hunched as if burdened by an invisible weight, she appeared to be searching for solace in the anonymity of the early hour. To the untrained eye, she was simply another citizen caught in the throes of urban hardship. However, every detail of her posture and expression had been carefully considered by those orchestrating the test. Her features and the quiet resolve in her eyes were those of someone who had endured too much, and yet, within them, there shone a hint of unwavering dignity. As the patrol cars began their silent roll along the street, the tension amongst the ranks was palpable. Officers, fresh from their morning briefings, were aware that today's exercise was unlike any other they had experienced. Whispers of uncertainty and hushed anticipatory comments passed between them as they received fragmented instructions urging them to observe, assess, and act as the situation demanded. No one knew the full extent of the exercise. Each individual was left to rely on instinct and training, a reality that, in the charged atmosphere of that cold morning, was about to be brutally tested. The calm facade quickly dissolved when one officer, reacting to an internal alarm that he could not quite place, made the fateful decision to move in aggressively. In an instant, the quiet street was transformed into a stage for raw, unchecked action. Voices raised in a mixture of commands and shouts, and a tense rhythm of footsteps echoed against the backdrop of distant sirens that had yet to fully awaken the city. Without warning, a group of officers closed in on the solitary figure by the curb. What unfolded in those harrowing moments defied the disciplined routine expected of a controlled exercise. The officers, driven by a mix of adrenaline and an almost primal need to assert control, surged forward with uncharacteristic ferocity. In a sequence of events that seemed to occur both in slow motion and in the blink of an eye, they overwhelmed the figure. The initial restraint that should have characterized any measured response evaporated amid a cascade of impulsive actions. Shouts of "move it," and "get down," reverberated in the cold air as physical force was employed with brutal efficiency. The first impact shattered the relative quiet as the figure stumbled, and then, with a sickening thud, was violently slammed to the pavement. The harsh scraping of uniforms against concrete, the muffled cries, and the harsh rustling of bodies converged in a moment of visceral chaos. In that charged instant, every officer was swept up in the momentum of the moment, their actions dictated by a mixture of rigorous training and an unspoken, dangerous bias. There was no time to deliberate, no pause to consider the implications of their actions, only the raw, unfiltered energy of a scenario spiraling quickly out of the realm of simulation. Amid the physical assault, the figure lay prone on the cold, unforgiving asphalt. Every thud of a body, every resounding command, was matched by an internal chorus of conflicting emotions. Unbeknownst to the attackers, the woman on the ground possessed a keen awareness of every nerve-wracking sensation. Beneath the surface of pain, an inner monologue raced through her thoughts, a blend of sorrow, resignation, and a steady, almost imperceptible hope that this ordeal would ultimately serve a greater purpose. Each impact, each forceful shove, was felt not just in her body but in the very core of her spirit. It was a moment of profound vulnerability and harrowing irony, a test that struck at the heart of the system she had sworn to transform. As the assault continued, bystanders who had already been drawn by the commotion began to emerge from the shadows. Smartphones were raised, their lenses capturing the unfolding horror with an immediacy that would later ripple through social media and public discourse. Among the murmurs of disbelief and shock, a few officers hesitated, their eyes darting to one another as the realization slowly crept in that something had gone terribly awry. The rigid chains of protocol that had once bound them seemed to falter under the weight of the unchecked emotion flooding the scene. In that critical, chaotic juncture, the boundaries between training and instinct blurred. The deliberate simulation designed to probe the strength of discipline took on a life of its own. Officers who had maintained a veneer of stoicism in the preparatory moments suddenly found themselves gripped by a wild, almost feral intensity. Each officer's mind was caught in a maelstrom of thoughts, reminders of duty, flashes of doubt, and, for some, the unsettling whisper of guilt. Their actions, synchronized in a disconcerting rhythm of force, became a mirror reflecting the underbelly of institutional power, a stark manifestation of a system that was teetering on the edge of moral collapse. In the midst of the frenzied assault, the woman on the ground experienced something far beyond physical pain. Each moment was punctuated by a painful awareness of the trust that had been betrayed, a trust that had been placed in the very hands of those who were meant to protect and serve. And yet, even as her body ached and the cold bite of concrete left its mark, a steady clarity surfaced within her. This was not merely an act of aggression, it was a convergence of the systemic flaws that had long simmered beneath the surface, now unleashed in a moment of unrelenting violence. The interplay of shock and duty had transformed the exercise into an event of unforeseen consequences. The morning's chaotic aftermath of the exercise had left an indelible scar on everyone present. In the thick haze of confusion and regret, whispers began to circulate among the officers and bystanders alike. What had been framed as a routine test of discipline, a simulated scenario meant to probe the boundaries of controlled force, had morphed into something unthinkable. Amid the stunned silence and the echo of countless raw emotions, the most astonishing truth began to emerge, a truth that would irrevocably reshape the very foundation of the institution. For those first disoriented moments after the incident, many assumed the victim was an ordinary civilian, a lone, unfortunate figure who had inadvertently become a pawn in a farce of training gone wrong. However, as the hours dragged on and evidence from shattered recordings and cell phone videos began to be pieced together, a pattern emerged. Faces that once sported a veneer of authority and control were now riddled with expressions of disbelief. The video evidence, painstakingly reviewed by internal investigators, revealed subtle details, the posture, the distinctive glint in her eyes, and even a hint of recognition in the way some senior officers exchanged furtive glances. There was an unmistakable familiarity in the features of the battered woman lying on the ground, a familiarity that sent a shiver down the spine of everyone who knew her story. It wasn't long before the truth became undeniable. The beaten figure was none other than Camille Hayes, the very woman who had ascended the ranks with a reputation for both uncompromising integrity and transformative vision. The revelation was a thrust of shock that pierced the collective consciousness of the police force. How could a high-ranking leader, widely respected as the reformer and fierce protector of justice, be reduced to such a vulnerable state? This contradictory image, the champion of the marginalized, battered on the cold asphalt by those sworn to uphold the law, shattered long-held illusions and forced everyone to confront the duality within the system. Deep within the silent corridors of the precinct, where the air was now thick with a mix of indignation and sorrow, senior officers gathered in private meetings. They exchanged disbelieving glances as the video evidence played on loop in conference rooms. The unthinkable irony of it all was discussed in halting, hushed tones. Camille Hayes, the embodiment of resilience and the catalyst for progressive reform, had been subjected to an act of violence executed under the guise of a controlled exercise. For some, it was a moment of personal reckoning, for others, an indictment of the corrosive elements that had stealthily infiltrated the department's very soul. In an office bathed in the sterile light of fluorescent bulbs, one middle-ranking officer hesitated before speaking, his voice shaking with a mix of guilt and awe. "We were supposed to be the ones ensuring justice," he murmured, looking down at a hand that trembled with residual adrenaline, not the instruments of its perversion. His words were not isolated, the confession of remorse echoed through the halls as other officers began to question the very protocols they once believed unassailable. The exercise, designed to test discipline, had inadvertently laid bare the system's vulnerabilities, unchecked aggression, internalized biases, and a blind adherence to outdated practices that had, over time, eroded the very principles they were meant to uphold. For Camille, the transition from leader to victim was as painful emotionally as it was physically. As she lay on the cold pavement, each deep, aching breath was a visceral reminder of the dichotomy of her existence, a dichotomy that had defined her entire career. In that critical, excruciating moment, her thoughts cascaded through memories of a life dedicated to fighting injustice. Flashbacks of her tumultuous childhood, the long hours spent poring over textbooks in dimly lit corners of dilapidated classrooms, and the searing recollections of moments when she had defied societal expectations all mingled in her consciousness. Every bruise on her flesh carried a story, every ragged inhalation whispered of resilience forged in the crucible of systemic oppression. Even as pain surged through her body, Camille's inner monologue was steady and resolute. She felt, with a piercing clarity, the injustice of a system that not only overlooked the suffering of the oppressed but also allowed its own guardians to perpetuate harm. Her mind's eye saw a reflection of all those who had suffered in silence, of communities whose voices were stifled by authority and fear. In that moment, the boundaries between her professional and personal identities blurred into a singular purpose, a clarion call to ignite transformation from within. Instead of surrendering to despair, she vowed that this painful episode would be the catalyst for a fundamental overhaul of the corrupt systems in place. News of the incident quickly spread beyond the precinct, igniting a firestorm of public outrage and intense media scrutiny. Social media platforms buzzed with a torrent of messages, some condemning the act as a betrayal by the very people entrusted with public safety, others expressing profound sorrow for a leader who had devoted her life to justice. News anchors, renowned for their stoic delivery, now struggled to articulate the layers of irony and tragedy embedded in the unfolding revelations. In live broadcasts, reporters painstakingly recounted every detail of the incident, emphasizing the stark irony that a woman who had long been championed as the bedrock of progressive change was now the unwitting symbol of institutional cruelty. Within the police department, the mood shifted inexorably from disbelief to an intense introspection. Meetings were convened to dissect every detail of the training exercise. High-ranking officials, who until now had been impervious to public criticism, were forced to confront the reality that the actions of their subordinates had far exceeded the limits of any sanctioned protocol. The revelation that Camille herself was the subject of the simulation raised unsettling questions about whether the design of the exercise had deliberately targeted her, a test not only of the officers' physical discipline but of their moral fortitude and commitment to justice. Whispers of dissent and debate spread like wildfire. Had Camille truly endorsed such an extreme measure to force a reckoning within the force? Or had rogue elements, driven by ingrained prejudices, hijacked what was meant to be a controlled demonstration? In the midst of these debates, Camille's own voice grew stronger even as her body bore the marks of the assault. Through the haze of physical pain, she summoned the strength to call for an emergency meeting with the department's top leadership. Seated at the head of a long, polished conference table, she addressed her colleagues not with recrimination, but with an impassioned plea for introspection and radical change. Today, we have witnessed not just a failure of discipline, but a deep failure of empathy and humanity, she declared, her voice firm despite the tremor of pain. We are entrusted with the power to protect and serve, and this power must be exercised with a steadfast commitment to justice, respect, and the dignity of every individual. Let my pain be a mirror reflecting our collective shortcomings, so that we may rebuild this system on a foundation that honors the very ideals we claim to uphold. Her words resonated deeply, and in that moment, the room seemed to vibrate with a shared understanding, a recognition that the institution needed a transformative shift. Every officer present, from the lowest-ranking recruit to the highest echelon of leadership, was forced to confront the dissonance between the noble mission of the force and the brutal realities of its operations. In that charged atmosphere, the seeds of change were sown. Camille's revelation became a rallying cry for accountability, demanding that every member of the department re-examine their actions and the values that had long been taken for granted. In the days that followed, the fallout from the revelation rippled far beyond the precinct walls. Camille's injury, which might have been dismissed as an isolated incident in another context, was instead elevated to a symbol of systemic failure. Activists and community leaders rallied together to demand sweeping reforms within the police force, while policy experts called for an overhaul of training programs to include robust modules on ethics, empathy, and the responsibilities inherent in positions of power. Public demonstrations erupted in city streets, as citizens from all walks of life demanded that those who had entrusted their safety to the police also be held accountable for their actions. Internally, the department instituted a series of rigorous investigations. Independent review panels were assembled, tasked with not only dissecting the events of that fateful morning but also with unearthing long-standing issues that had festered within the organizational culture for years. The investigation uncovered layers of complicity, a bureaucratic inertia that had, over time, allowed aggressive practices to go unchecked. In the process, several officers were subjected to disciplinary actions, and mandatory retraining programs were launched, aimed at fostering a deeper understanding of community-centered policing and the need for constant self-reflection. Amidst this transformation, Camille Hayes stood as a paradox, a leader who, despite being physically battered, emanated a profound inner strength and unwavering moral clarity. Her ordeal had transformed her into an even more formidable advocate for change. No longer could she be seen merely as an enforcer of the law, she was now the living embodiment of the need for reform. Her experience, painful and deeply personal, was the catalyst that had forced the institution to reckon with its own failures. And while the process of healing, both personal and institutional, would be long and arduous, her unwavering resolve provided a beacon of hope for a future where justice was not compromised by hubris or prejudice. In that transformative moment, the truth that had been hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and ingrained behavior was finally laid bare. Camille's ordeal ignited a movement within the force, one that would challenge every member to examine their conscience and, ultimately, redefine what it meant to serve and protect in a world fraught with complexity and contradiction. What do you think is the most critical change that must be made within institutions to truly reconcile the ideals of justice with the reality of human imperfection? In the painful wake of revelations and public outcry, the once unyielding structure of the police force began to tremble at its very foundation. The raw emotions stirred by the incident and its aftermath paved the way for an unprecedented movement for change, a movement that would redefine not only the institution's culture but also Camille Hayes' very identity as both a wounded leader and a fierce advocate for justice. In the ensuing days, a palpable sense of urgency swept through the corridors of power, setting into motion a transformation that promised healing and reformation in equal measure. The early hours of that fateful day had marked the beginning of a profound reckoning within the police department. High-ranking officials and street-level officers alike were forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that their actions, however well-intentioned, had betrayed the very values they had sworn to uphold. At the heart of this introspection was Camille, whose own suffering had exposed the cracks in a system once thought impenetrable. Her bruised and battered body was a living testament to a past steeped in both pain and potential, a stark reminder that even those who lead can be vulnerable, and that vulnerability could serve as a potent catalyst for change. Faced with mounting evidence of systemic abuse and unchecked aggression, senior management initiated sweeping reforms aimed at overhauling the force's training methods and accountability structures. The days that followed were fraught with tense meetings, candid admissions of failure, and a renewed call for integrity. At the center of these discussions, Camille stood resolute. Despite the physical and emotional toll that the incident had exacted, she embraced her new role as both a victim of an unjust system and as its driving force for reform. With quiet determination, she began to lead a series of town hall meetings and confidential workshops that brought together officers, community leaders, and external experts to dissect every facet of the crisis. In one of these early gatherings, held in a modest community center on the outskirts of the city, Camille addressed a diverse audience with a sincerity that left no one untouched. "We have all witnessed an act that no one should ever have to endure," she began, her voice steady despite the lingering pain in her chest. "Today, we stand at the crossroads of accountability and transformation. Let our mistakes be the brick and mortar on which we build a more compassionate, just future." Her words, measured and laden with both sorrow and hope, resonated deeply with those present. Each personal story of struggle shared in that room added a brick to the foundation of a new ethos, one that valued transparency, human dignity, and relentless commitment to accountability. Camille's personal journey of recovery became emblematic of the broader healing process within the department. Over the following months, she embarked on a long, arduous path to physical and emotional recovery. Intensive therapy sessions, community support programs, and personal meditative retreats became integral to her daily routine. Though the pain of betrayal lingered like a constant reminder of a broken system, Camille's resilience shone through. Every scar on her body was a symbol of her enduring spirit, a testament to her belief that from deep adversity, the seeds of change could blossom into profound reform. As the institution began to rethink its entrenched practices, accountability measures were overhauled with a focus on dismantling old power structures. An independent oversight committee was established, tasked with monitoring police conduct and ensuring that any abuse of power would be met with swift, impartial consequences. This new body, composed of respected community figures, legal experts, and former law enforcement officials, was designed to restore public confidence in a system that had long teetered on the edge of moral bankruptcy. The committee's creation marked a tangible shift in power, a symbolic acknowledgement that the voices of the marginalized and the wisdom of those who had suffered were not just valid, but indispensable. Within the police department, the atmosphere gradually shifted from one of guarded defensiveness to cautious optimism. Officers, many of whom had once operated under the shadow of unchallenged authority, were now encouraged to engage in honest self-reflection. Regular internal reviews and open forums became commonplace, ensuring that every member of the force had the opportunity to voice their concerns and propose meaningful reforms. Training modules were revamped to include immersive lessons on ethics, empathy, and the psychological dimensions of community policing. For the first time in decades, the curriculum openly addressed the dangerous interplay between discipline and prejudice, urging officers to see beyond rigid protocols and to embrace the human side of their roles. Amidst this transformation, Camille's personal story continued to be a beacon of hope. In the weeks following the revelation of her ordeal, she received an outpouring of support from communities across the nation. Vigils were held, letters of solidarity were sent, and impassioned speeches at public rallies called for not only justice for Camille but a sweeping reformation of all institutions that had allowed such brutality to persist. For Camille, these moments of communal empathy reinforced her conviction that change was not only necessary but inevitable. Through the pain of her experience and the solidarity of those who believed in her vision, she began to see the beginnings of a new era, one where the strength of a community could overcome even the most deeply ingrained injustices. In a particularly moving public address broadcast live on multiple media platforms, Camille shared her vision for a reformed future. "Our duty is not simply to enforce the law," she declared, her eyes burning with resolve, "but to serve humanity with compassion, respect, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Let every bruise, every tear, and every moment of despair guide us toward a future where every individual is valued, and every voice is heard." The address stirred a profound sense of empathy and accountability in listeners both within and beyond the force. It catalyzed further discussions on the intersection of power and vulnerability, leading to broader societal debates on the nature of authority in modern democratic societies. For many officers, Camille's transformation from victim to reformer became a powerful case study in leadership and redemption. Mentorship programs were instituted, pairing veteran officers with younger recruits to bridge the gap between rigid, old-school methods and the evolving ethos of empathetic service. These programs emphasized the importance of humility, self-awareness, and the willingness to learn from past mistakes. Officers were encouraged to share their personal stories of struggle and growth, fostering an environment where vulnerability was not seen as a weakness but as a crucial step toward genuine accountability. The narrative of institutional reform, however, was not without its challenges. Resistance emerged from those who had long benefited from the status quo, the entrenched power brokers who saw any change as a threat to their authority. Behind closed doors, heated debates continued over resource allocations, disciplinary measures, and the pace at which reforms should be implemented. Yet, despite the internal resistance, the winds of change continued to blow. Every challenge and every setback served to reinforce Camille's resolve. Every moment of resistance was met with an even stronger call for accountability and reform. As months turned into a year, tangible results began to materialize. The crime rates, once obscured by the facade of aggressive policing, started to decline as trust between law enforcement and the communities grew. New community outreach programs, devised in close collaboration with local leaders, began to mend the broken bonds of trust. Neighborhoods that had long felt abandoned by the system found renewed hope in collaborative efforts to create safer, more inclusive spaces. Small victories, such as the successful resolution of community disputes and the establishment of grassroots support centers, served as affirmations that the reforms were on the right track. In the midst of these developments, Camille never lost sight of her personal mission. Her journey of healing was interwoven with the reformative process, and she became a powerful voice for ensuring that the lessons learned from her ordeal were not forgotten. Public forums continued to highlight her testimony, not as an isolated incident but as a clarion call for systemic re-evaluation. In countless interviews and written editorials, she reiterated that true reform required a multifaceted approach, one that combined technological accountability, rigorous training, empathetic leadership, and, most importantly, an unwavering commitment to treating every human life with dignity. The transformation of the police force began to capture the attention of national policymakers and international observers. Experts in law enforcement and civil rights lauded the steps taken as groundbreaking, a rare instance where a system acknowledged its inherent flaws and mobilized toward comprehensive change. Critics, however, cautioned that the road ahead would remain fraught with challenges. They emphasized the need for continued vigilance, robust oversight, and an ongoing dialogue between the institution and the communities it served. Against this backdrop of caution and hope, Camille Hayes emerged not just as a reformer but as a symbol of resilience in the face of systemic adversity. Her personal struggle, marked by moments of excruciating pain and defiant determination, had become the impetus for an entire cultural shift within the force. Her legacy was redefined from one of authoritarian command to one of empathetic stewardship, a transformation that resonated deeply with every individual who had once felt marginalized by a system that prioritized power over people. In a reflective moment during one of her many community visits, Camille stood before a mural painted on the wall of a neighborhood community center. The vibrant colors depicted a rising phoenix, a powerful symbol of rebirth and hope. As she gazed at the mural, she whispered, almost to herself, "We have been broken, but we are not beyond repair. Every fracture in our past is an opportunity to build a future that is more just and humane." Those words, laden with both personal conviction and universal aspiration, captured the essence of her message, a call to embrace our shared humanity and to forge a path forward that honors the dignity of every life. What is one concrete step you believe institutions can take to ensure that empathy and accountability remain at the forefront of their evolution? In the heart of every story lies a spark, a luminous ember that, despite the weight of adversity, continues to glow. As we draw this narrative to a close, let us reflect on the transformative journey of Camille Hayes, a journey forged in pain, resilience, and relentless courage. Her life, marked by trials and triumphs, reminds us that even in our darkest moments, a single soul can ignite change and inspire healing in the world around us. For many of us, the challenges of injustice, misunderstanding, and personal grief seem overwhelming. Yet, Camille's experience teaches us that vulnerability is not a sign of weakness but an invitation to embrace our shared humanity. Her struggle against a system steeped in outdated practices and brutal rigidity reveals that every setback is an opportunity, a chance to reimagine our approach, to rebuild with love and authenticity. When we allow ourselves to be moved by empathy and guided by compassion, we embark on a collective mission to transform not only our communities but also our hearts. Imagine for a moment the quiet power of unity. In the wake of her ordeal, Camille mobilized voices both inside and outside her institution, stirring a movement that dared to question the status quo. Each community meeting, every heartfelt conversation, and every act of solidarity became a testament to the beauty of resilience. It is in these moments, when we choose to listen, to understand, and to care, that we become agents of genuine change. We are all part of a larger mosaic, where each individual contribution weaves a pattern of strength and love. In today's complex world, where divisions and discord too often cloud our vision of hope, Camille's legacy offers a guiding light. Her story is not solely about the pain of being let down by those entrusted with protection, it is also a narrative of rebirth. Out of the ruins of broken trust emerged a powerful catalyst for reform, a call to look within and to rebuild our institutions on the unshakable foundation of empathy and respect. In every bruise and every healing scar, we see a reflection of our own struggles and our capacity to overcome them. Take a moment now to consider your own role in this tapestry of life. Each day, we make choices that ripple outward, touching lives in ways both seen and unseen. Whether it is by standing up for someone in need, offering a kind word to a weary friend, or simply listening with an open heart, you contribute to the change that the world so desperately needs. The story of Camille is not a distant echo, it is an invitation for us all to recognize that our personal battles can be transformed into beacons of hope. There is a quiet magic in acknowledging our imperfections. It is not the absence of fault that defines us, but the courage to rise after every fall. In our shared human experience, every challenge we endure becomes a stepping stone toward a future imbued with possibility and light. As Camille discovered amidst the rubble of injustice, the true measure of a person is found not in their ability to avoid hardship but in their grace to rise above it, with dignity and love. When we open our hearts to one another, we break the chains of isolation that bind us to despair. It is in these moments of unity that we begin to see the world as it might be, a place where respect, compassion, and genuine accountability form the pillars of every community. Let us remember that the transformation we seek, both within ourselves and in our institutions, begins with a single, heartfelt act. In every act of kindness, in every instance where empathy triumphs over indifference, we plant a seed that will someday blossom into a healthier, more just society. As we part ways today, carry this truth with you: every obstacle overcome, every act of care extended, and every moment spent in solidarity is a step toward a world that honors the dignity of every human life. Camille's story is a reminder that from pain can arise profound healing, and that hope, no matter how fragile it may seem, is an enduring force capable of lighting the way forward. May her journey inspire you to be courageous in your own life, to face adversity with an unwavering belief in the power of compassion, and to remember that even the smallest gesture of love can spark monumental change. Let us come together to create a future where every voice is heard, every heart is valued, and the light of hope shines brightly through the darkness. Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery, transformation, and hope. Subscribe to our channel and be part of a growing community committed to inspiring change, fostering empathy, and making a difference, one story at a time.